Dads play an incredibly crucial role in our lives and help shape who we become. And the dad is possibly one of the deepest explored archetypes in animation, but not all of them are created equal.
All right, let's see what you get. Stupid game anyway.
In honor of Father's Day, this is the Cartoon Dads tier list. As usual, we're starting with the worst and working our way up. This is the D tier, and the only gift these guys are getting is a trip to the nursing home. Or prison? Probably prison, actually. We wish we could say our last place pick was harder to decide this time around, but if anything, Fire Lord Ozai from Avatar The Last Airbender made it even easier. Almost undoubtedly the most evil villain in Nicktoons history, Ozai is a war criminal, a genocidal dictator, and a nationalistic racist. With all that being considered, could you believe us if we said that his parenting is still somehow the most notorious attribute of his? Seriously, whether it's Zuko or Azula, Ozai's kids were done dirtier than a gas station bathroom.
And suffering will be your teacher.
Zuko is definitely the more obvious case, having his eye burnt and scarred by his own father for the crime of... let me check my notes. Suggesting that sending their own soldiers out as cannon fodder was detestable? So yeah, he had to deal with the trauma of being both physically and emotionally scarred by his father, to the point where he obsessed over capturing the Avatar to regain his favor. But while Azula received heavy favoritism for her loyalty to Daddy Dearest, just a hint of observance shows that, deep down, she's a child desperately longing for her father's affection, and obeying his every whim ensures that she won't be cast out like Zuko. So that's a great relationship. I mean, Azula's definitely not a good person, but she's just as much a victim of Ozai as Zuko is. The man is a genuine monster, and he sees his children not as people, but as commodities he can use to his own ends. Only marginally better is our silver medalist of bad parenting, Clay Puppington. We mentioned him briefly in our mom's tier list while talking about Blaberta, but it's time to fully lay into this stop-motion scumbag. Clay is an extremely abusive father who's fully aware that his substance abuse has made him an utterly horrible human being. In nearly every episode, he calls Moral into his study to discipline him, which basically means physically beating Moral and threatening him. He also shot him one time, which, yeah, on top of being an insensitive racist, abuser, and alcoholic, that definitely isn't helping his case. The only reason we aren't putting Clay at the very bottom of our list is because he does actually have a pretty horrible past regarding his own family life. His father only gave him attention through physical violence, so while that comes nowhere near excusing his poor actions, it at least sort of explains them and gives us a little bit of sympathy for the guy, if only he made any actual effort to break the cycle, but you know. In third to last place is Beatrice Horseman's father, Joseph Sugarman. We only see him in a couple of episodes of BoJack Horseman, most notably Time's Arrow, which acts as a flashback of his upbringing of BoJack's mother, Beatrice. Now, Beatrice is a horrible person and parent, but next to Joseph, she looks like a saint, at least in terms of deeds, if not motivations. Behind his relatively friendly persona is a ruthless, callous man who's willing to do anything to keep, not the reality, but the image of a healthy nuclear family. This man saw his wife deeply distraught at the death of her son, and how it was endangering their child. So rather than even trying to support her emotionally, he decided the best way to help her was to have her lobotomized. No, screw it was a different time. He didn't know better. Who comes to that conclusion? But even then, the reason we bring this up is because the actual psychopath thought he was helping. He thought doing this would put his daughter in less danger from his wife's womanly emotions and would make his wife calmer.
She just let her womanly emotions get the better of her, that's all.
In actuality, all this achieved was getting Beatrice a deep-rooted fear the same would happen to her if she upset Joseph or failed to protect her own child. He may have meant well, but that's only worth so much when your misdeeds are so bad. We might be out of the bottom three, but we still aren't even close to decent parent territory. Next is Mr. Ruckus. Uncle Ruckus might be a bad guy. Okay, you could erase might from that sentence actually, but his awful parents didn't help, and while Bunny was a completely moronic parent, she at least genuinely loved her kids. Mr. beat Ruckus for basically anything and everything. If he caught you having fun or wanting to be shit, it was game over before you even started playing. Ruckus's brothers say they beat him too, but they agree Uncle got the worst of it. The only sympathetic trait we can attribute to Mr. Ruckus is that he was horribly mistreated by the people around him, and he at least worked to provide for his family. Mind you, that's on top of him having to deal with the fact that his wife insisted on raising Uncle to believe he was white. It took a harsh toll on his body and mind, and while that doesn't excuse his actions, we can at least acknowledge that villains can be victims too. Joseph Sugarman may have been awful, but BoJack's own father, Butterscotch Horseman, is barely any better. He's probably the character we have the least to say about. We see much less of him than we do of Beatrice, abuse, and furthermore, we see less of his dynamic with Bojack. But that doesn't detract from how neglectful, verbally, and physically abusive Butterscotch was towards Bojack. He's also highly manipulative, and when he was caught cheating on his wife by Bojack, he got him drunk so he'd pass out and subtly blackmailed him to not tell his mother what he saw. Oh, and you know what makes it worse? Butterscotch is the biological father of Hollyhock, meaning he's an abusive father and a deadbeat father. 2 for 1, baby! Coincidentally, our next entry has a son with a similar name to the previous entry. Butterscotch's father, Stephen Stotch, is proof that sometimes the apple falls very far from the tree. Pretty much every bad parenting trait in the book applies to Stephen. He's physically and verbally abusive to his son, taking genuine passion and punishing him for actually no reason.
What's going on?
Butters started an Asian turf war.
There are a lot of bad parents on this list, as we've seen already, but Stephen is one of the worst for the sole fact that he legitimately has no reason to treat Butters the way he does. He's closer to a bully than an actual father, making him one of the most vile characters on our list, and honestly, how a sweet kid like Butters came from a dirtbag like this is beyond me. Up next, we're moving from criminally bad parents to a straight-up criminal, Jack Smith, the father of Stan from American Dad. Now, say what you will about Stan, we'll get to him later, but if nothing else, you at least get the sense that he genuinely loves his family. Jack, on the other hand, was an incredibly neglectful father who would rather let his son hang out with a homeless man named Henderson, paying him to be his imaginary friend, than actually spend any time with him. His parenting hasn't improved in adulthood either. In his debut appearance, he betrays Stan and leaves him to presumably get arrested during a heist. The saddest thing about his placement is that Jack has had good moments. In one episode, he takes a bullet that was meant to kill Stan, but any credit he would get for that is immediately taken away by his post-mortem actions. Yes, really, even after he dies, Jack is still the worst. He possesses Steve, his grandson, and uses his body to pull off a notorious museum heist and frame him for it, which would have effectively ruined Steve's life. Multiple generations of awful parenting and neglect earn him a harsh placement on our list. It won't take a fairly high IQ to realize why Rick Sanchez is so low on our list. Father of Beth Smith and grandfather of Morty, Rick is an awful human being, really. He's aggressively nihilistic, resulting in him behaving in erratic ways with little to no care for his family's well-being. He was extremely neglectful and borderline absent as a father, which led to most of Beth's own personality issues, even creating an imaginary world called Fruipyland for her to keep her occupied instead of actually parenting her. He's a terrible dad, for sure, but the fact that Rick at least acknowledges that he's a bad parent and is doing some work to fix it is enough to keep him from falling any lower. For instance, in the same episode as the aforementioned imaginary realm, he gives her advice to find out who she truly is when she's having an identity crisis. He's a crappy father, but deep down, he does actually love his daughter, which is sadly worth a lot in this tier. Okay, I cannot believe he made it this high, but next is Peter Griffin. We won't blame anyone who expected him to be even lower. Peter is a complete moron and an actual psychopath who constantly endangers his children and is willing to throw them under the bus when it seems convenient. He's straight up admitted he doesn't like spending time with his children and isn't a stranger to physically or psychologically abusing them.
Oh my god, my diary! I hate you all!
Even if we ignore the whole episodes that prove this, Peter's casual behavior makes his horrid parenting skills quite evident. But as anyone who's watched a single episode past season 4 knows, Meg gets the worst of it, by far. Like, remember that one episode where he became a redneck and tried to sleep with Meg? Or remember that episode where he just shot her for no reason? She just said hi, dude. Peter is hilarious, but he's one of the worst fathers in animation history, so how is he even this high? Well, here's the thing. While Peter is an abusive, idiotic man, you do get the sense that deep down, he loves his family, and suffice to say, we do want to give him some credit for his earlier season's counterpart. Before Peter went full psycho, he was still an ignorant father, but he came across as a man who was genuinely trying to protect and care for his kids. Even in later seasons, there have been times where his more decent characteristics come out, like when he briefly became the principal of Meg's school and used his position to stand up to her bullies. The fat man has definitely fallen in recent years, but he still has some redeeming qualities, and honestly, even having something adjacent to love for your kids is worth a lot in this list. It's also worth noting that for as often as Peter mistreats his children, he does feel genuine remorse for it most of the time, which shows that he at least has something adjacent to a conscience. Following Peter is another adult sitcom icon, Randy Marsh. Randy is a difficult character to place. He's one of the most consistently antagonistic members of the main cast, and it's because of him being incredibly selfish. He's willing to put his family in situations they're uncomfortable or unhappy with for the sake of furthering his own selfish desires, and almost never puts his children's needs before his own desires. Why then do we even bother putting him this high? It's not like there's anything particularly redeeming about his parenting skills, but there is a reason. Wait for it. He doesn't physically abuse his kids.
I hate you so much.
I think we're having a breakthrough moment.
Yes, he verbally abuses them and constantly exposes them to his arguments with his wife, but the bar is about 500 feet below surface level right now, and he's therefore just barely able to leap above it. And for the final D-tier spot, we're picking Cotton Hill. Hank Hill is one of the most beloved fathers in animation, both as a character and as a dad in general, so it might be initially surprising that his father is a man as hateful and cruel as Cotton. We get it, dude. You lost your shins in the war, you killed 50 men, and you have some serious trauma, but that doesn't excuse how absolutely cruel you are to your wife and son. Even when Cotton is trying to be nice to his kid, he fails miserably, like the time you took Hank and the guys to a brothel to celebrate a good game. He hasn't improved in his older years either. He still verbally abuses and berates Hank and Hank's wife whenever he gets the chance. That's not even mentioning his rampant misogyny, which he often influences his grandson with.
Come on, get me my beer, woman.
As much of a sleazy guy as Cotton is, we sadly can't place him any lower due to the fact that he is a half-decent father to his second son, Good Hank, and he clearly loves his grandson Bobby, willing to take a hit to his reputation to save Bobby from being known as the man with the horrible smell who burnt down the church. But sadly, his love for those two is more than evened out by his hatred for Hank. Even on his deathbed, he couldn't tell Hank he loved him and made fun of Hank for telling him the same. But now we move on to the slightly less scummy parents. These guys are still questionable quality parents, but they at least have enough redeeming traits to stay in the C tier. Kicking things off is a strong contender for the dumbest parent on the whole list, Timmy's dad. Like Timmy's mom, Mr. Turner is ignorant, neglectful, and a complete failure of a parent. We could give him some credit for his attentiveness to Timmy's earlier years, if it didn't delve into full-on helicopter parent territory, that is. He's definitely not a helicopter parent anymore, but now he's on the other side of the spectrum.
Meet the kid I can't wait to take to work today instead of you!
A neglectful idiot who's constantly leaving his child with a vile babysitter so he and Mrs. Turner can go out like their whole life is a frat party. If nothing else though, we can say that Mr. Turner genuinely loves Timmy. He's happy to spend time with him whenever the situation allows for it, like taking him to his exciting job at Pencil Nexus or leading his Squirrely Scouts troop, but that doesn't erase all his neglect. And okay, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that one scene where he straight up implies that his dreams were shattered the moment Timmy was born.
My dreams were shattered years ago.
How many years ago?
How old are you?
Like, dude, who says that to their child? From a neglectful parent to a pathetic one. Next we have Jerry Smith from Rick and Morty. Jerry isn't necessarily a bad person, a fact that he will no doubt remind you of any chance he gets, but as a parent, he leaves a lot to be desired. Often his kids are the ones who have to reassure and support him rather than the other way around. Rarely is Jerry offering them advice or guidance, and neither of them really have any respect for him. But while he's generally handed a lot more scrutiny than Rick is, Jerry is undoubtedly a better father to his kids, which is saying almost nothing, but the key word there is almost. First of all, he's at least there, which places him above Rick by default. He might normally be a spineless doormat, but there are times when he's willing to fight to protect his family when the situation demands it. And there's evidence to show that he's grown over the course of the series, like in the episode Analyze Piss, where he beats up Pissmaster as payback for harassing his family. There's just enough evidence that he's not a total wuss to keep him from falling any lower than the C tier. We've got a much cooler Smith to talk about next. Good morning, USA! We've got a feeling that it's going to be a wonderful day for Stan Smith, who miraculously avoided a spot in the D tier. Despite the absolutely horrific deeds under Staniel's belt, from faking his family's vacations to Frankensteining Haley's face instead of owning up to his mistake to, I don't know, like 90% of the episodes he's paired with Steven. So how in the name of Tequila Joe did he get here with all that considered? Well, it's simple. While Stan has some horrific misdeeds under his belt, granted, they're almost always either rooted in a place of good intentions or made up for in the most extravagant of ways he can think of. He may not be great at showing it, but Stan loves his family, and no matter how badly he can treat them sometimes, you can bet he'll do whatever it takes to make up for it. That episode where he massacres Haley's face, later he admits his wrongdoing and paints a mural dedicated to his mistake. The time he dressed as a bully and became Steve's tormentor, he was trying genuinely to teach his son to stand up for himself, coming from a place of concern, if nothing else. And if there's any remaining doubt that he loves his kids, enter the Wonder Cabinet, an episode where Steve learns to astral project, and while searching for a room of stuff related to the activity, he discovers that it's actually his own room, and that Stan has been trying everything he can to wake Steve out of his astral projected coma for months. When it comes down to it, Stan does sincerely love his family and is willing to go to some extreme lengths for them. Now it's time for the most iconic cartoon dad of all time, Homer Simpson. You'd think that a guy whose strangling of his son is one of his series' most beloved running gags would be in the detail without question, but Homer is a better father than his surface-level personality would have you think. This goes for the earlier seasons especially. While Homer was always kind of a short-tempered oaf, he was willing to do anything for his family, from working 2 jobs to support Lisa's dream of owning a pony, to stopping Bart from performing a deadly Daredevil stunt. On one occasion, when he was struggling to pay the bills, he contemplated ending his own life so his family could get a life insurance payout, showing that he's genuinely concerned with providing for them. That said, for all his good attributes, Homer still declined significantly in later seasons. He's more inept than ever, often neglecting his kids and failing to guide them like he needs to, but he still isn't an outright abusive psychopath, which puts him above some other family guys. His short temper, especially with Bart, also keeps him from earning any more credit. Homer might not be abusive, but he's quite often irresponsible, neglectful, and just not the greatest role model for his children. We have a musician on our hands next. He's the legendary author of the New Shoes song, Robert Freeman. This self-proclaimed civil rights legend is known for constantly threatening his kids with butt whoopings, which, maybe that wasn't the best thing to lead with. But if you're willing to look past that, you have a granddad who takes responsibility for his grandkids and takes care of them to the best of his ability. While he isn't perfect, he's there for his grandkids when he's needed, like when Riley thought he was gay because Gangstalicious was. For all of his poor parenting traits, the fact that he accepted Riley as he was spoke volumes to the kind of father figure he is. As for Huey, while granddad doesn't always understand the boy's activism, he usually supports him and sometimes offers some surprisingly sage advice. Seriously, you do what you can has become something I quote almost daily. Scuttling towards the end of the C tier is Mr. Eugene Krabs. While he's incredibly cheap, to say the least, Mr. Krabs is a genuinely loving father to his whale daughter, Pearl. For every time he throws a disgustingly cheap birthday party for her featuring dishwater instead of punch, there's another where he's willing to give his daughter the world. In the episode Squeaky Boots, he buys Pearl the flipper slippers she wanted all along, despite an attempt to get away with a much cheaper gift. We can't forget the episode Growth Spurt either, where he stole food from the entirety of Bikini Bottom during a painful growth spurt of pearls. He may be a greedy son of a gun, but Mr. Krabs is a genuinely loving father. Even if he'd give up anything for money, he'd probably think twice about that sentiment if that included his darling Pearly. Rounding out the C tier, we have one more Nickelodeon dad, Ed Bighead, from Rocko's Modern Life. Rocko's curmudgeon of a neighbor, Ed is the father of Rachel Bighead, formerly Ralph Bighead, who disowned his son in the original series for the crime of, wait for it, being a cartoonist.
I have no parents.
This is probably a double entendre for the parents who disown their LGBT+ children, which actually isn't super uncommon in this series, but at the end of the episode, he does come around on his son's career and accepts him for who he is. Then just a couple decades later, it was socially acceptable to talk about such issues without using cartoon frogs and various metaphors, and so the Static Cling movie saw Ed go through an arc of accepting his now daughter Rachel in a transition to womanhood. Ed might be a total jerk, but he's willing to grow as a person, frog when it comes down to it, for the sake of his relationship with his kid, at least. Okay, we're finally moving on to the characters we can confidently call consistently good fathers. This is the B tier, for dads who are flawed, but overall stay on the more positive end of the spectrum. Kicking off this category is Penny Proud's father, Oscar Proud. Now, we'll start by saying there's definitely a lot bad you could say about this guy. He's insanely overprotective of Penny, getting upset when she so much as looks at boys, and it doesn't bring in a lot of income to support the household. But to conclude that makes him a bad father is harsh. He might be a total helicopter parent and an unsuccessful businessman, but at least he's genuinely trying, right? It's not easy being a working man or a father, and the guy's just trying to juggle both of these things. I'm not saying he's without flaws, but we're saying that all things considered, he's a decent father who just wants to provide for his family and protect them, even if he's not the most competent at either. Nobody's as excited for the big reveal of our next spot as Professor Membrane.
Not scientifically possible!
It would be easy to call Membrane a bad father due to how little time he spends with his children, but given how important his job is, you've got to cut the guy some slack. No matter how long he spends in the lab, he does his best to be at least somewhat present. When he can't make it to breakfast or school events, he'll usually show up via a computer screen from long distances, and he'll make it a point to schedule family time outside of work, even if he can only do it once a year. We see Membrane at both his best and worst in the Enter the Florpus movie, in which we see firsthand how hard of a time Membrane has to understand Dib's interest in the paranormal. But regardless of this, he does make an effort to connect with him and assures him that despite not always understanding him, he does love his son, and he's proud of him regardless. And as much of an adorable little menace as Gaz is, I mean, come on, she loves her dad. She invaded an alien spacecraft to save Dib just so she could go to Bloaty's Pizza Hog with him. That's some dedication that tells you your kids want to spend time with you. Next we have Timmy's other incompetent dad, but as you can see, Cosmo has definitely earned more of our respect. Well, as a person at least. Given that Cosmo has the brain capacity of a deflated balloon, he isn't really one to offer Timmy sage advice nor guidance. In fact, his influence often either enables or inspires Timmy's reckless or selfish wishing.
Oh, please
Please, Wanda. Timmy's way too cool to be smart.
But as a fairy godparent, Cosmo does his best to help Timmy with wishes, be it granting them or fixing the chaos they inevitably create. He might not be the most competent parent, but he's a pretty good support to his godchild nonetheless, and that extends to his biological son, Poof, as well. Our old friend, Cleveland Brown, takes the next spot. It takes a lot to be a good dad, and you could argue it takes even more to be a good stepdad. You've got a lot to live up to and a lot of shared responsibility to take on there. Now, take both those struggles and put them together, and you've got everybody's favorite happy mustached face. Whether it's his son, Cleveland Jr., or his stepkids, Rollo and Roberta, Cleveland is always doing his best to care for and protect his kids. While Cleveland can often make poor parenting decisions, he almost always makes them out of a place of love or good intentions, and at the end of the day, his parenting mistakes come nowhere near the egregiousness of Peter's or Stan's. There's also no abuse going on here, verbal or physical, nor does it seem like Cleveland is even capable of doing so. He can be incompetent, but you can count on him a lot more consistently than most of the other characters on the list so far. Let's go ahead and throw one more character into the lovable comic relief father category. Richard Watterson is up next. Like Cosmo, Richard can often be just as immature as his children, if not more so. This is especially evident in the first season, where there are whole episodes dedicated to Richard being aggressively lazy, playing dangerous pranks on his children, and being convinced that a magic wand toy from a cereal box is real. Were this season all we had on Richard, he'd be much lower on our list, but as the series went on, he thankfully improved a lot. The episode that really started a turnaround on Richard's character as a father was The Hero, in which he comes to terms with the fact that his children no longer view him as a hero, only to ultimately rescue them from a deadly junkyard when Darwin's plan to reconcile him and Gumball goes wrong. From then on out, we see that Richard is deeply loving and considerate of his children, offering his own, sometimes questionable, brand of advice and guidance, and being willing to put himself in harm's way for them. His methods may be weird, but whatever he's doing, it's working. A hero to stay-at-home dads everywhere. In a similar vein is Steven Universe's father, Greg Universe. Greg might be lazy, irresponsible, and honestly acts more like a friend than a father most of the time, but what he lacks in practical advice and responsibility, he more than makes up for with his emotional intelligence and the willingness to share that wisdom with his boy. Unfortunately, well, Greg is still very much an irresponsible bum. We give him points for raising Steven in his early years, but he still had to leave him with the gems so Steven could learn how to use his powers. This led to Greg more or less just letting Steven do whatever he wanted to at a certain point, and while that might seem neglectful, it turns out this was more of a way for Greg to break the cycle of toxic control his own parents had over him. Greg is a flawed parent, but he definitely isn't a bad one. While he may not be a biological father, we're giving Dale Gribble a much-deserved spot in one of our more respectable tiers. Dale can be a real jerk, an inconsiderate neighbor and spouse, and sometimes a downright dangerous moron, but one thing about this character that's never brought into question is his love for his son, Joseph, who he either fully believes is his own son, or is using to get the absolute best payback ever on John Redcorn. Either way, he loves his boy. Heck, the only reason Peggy decided not to tell Dale about Nancy's affair was because of his relationship with Joseph. He goes above and beyond for him, always willing to place him above everything else.
Can't watch Encino Man without milk balls, huh?
Thanks, Dad!
Like, come on, just look at this. Dale's not always the most responsible guy, but Joseph is the one aspect of his life that doesn't have a selfish or morally gray area to it. Nearing the end of the B tier is Stu Pickles. Like Dale, Stu is a deeply caring father to his children, and that extends to his nieces and nephews too. Additionally, he's much smarter and less dangerous than Dale, which pretty much earns him a higher spot by default. The only reason we're keeping him here is that while he's definitely a good father, he doesn't really spend as much time with his kids as he should, especially considering their ages. The babies know Stu loves them, but there's room for improvement, and that keeps him from being any higher up. And we've got one hell of a dad to round out B tier, Lucifer Morningstar from Has Been Hotel. While the pilot might have given the indication that Lucifer was an absentee father, an indication that was partially true, we'll admit his appearance in the full series redeemed him in fans' eyes pretty darn quickly.
My daughter wants to see me!
In Charlie's childhood, even through his deep depression, Lucifer was happy to show a younger Charlie his visions for the world, but sadly, Lilith seems to have wanted to maintain some distance between the two. The moment Charlie reached out, however, Lucifer was ecstatic to see her again, devoting himself to the development of her hotel and becoming the dad she always wanted in her life. Daddy issues in cartoons are the furthest thing from uncommon, so to see one of those issues actually resolved is pretty satisfying. He's the one to beat up Adam for hurting his family, and the first to cheer up Charlie after the hotel is destroyed in the fight against Heaven. This might be the only context I'm willing to say this in, but you earned my respect, Lucifer. And now we're getting into the dads whose children are almost definitely winning, and even if they aren't, the A-tier fathers love them anyway. Next we have a brief mention of Harold Squarepants. Really, anything we can say about his wife Margaret applies to Harold too. He's always there to support his son, from letting him move back in when his house is eaten by nematodes to helping set up a surprise party complete with a brand new boatmobile when he finally got his license. Harold is a minor character, but he's definitely one of the most consistently good cartoon fathers out there. It's no wonder SpongeBob turned out to be such a nice, hardworking dude with such good parents. Now say good morning to our next entry, Uncle Grandpa. With a power set that would make the greatest anime protagonists break a sweat, Uncle Grandpa could easily use them for world domination. But as the commercials always assured us, Uncle Grandpa is everyone's uncle and grandpa. As such, he devotes his time and attention to helping kids all around the world with their problems. Sure, this does sometimes endanger them, almost always actually, but any guy who devotes his life to making his kids happy is a pretty great dad in our book. Like, you're just Santa at that point, man. We can't not respect that. Up next, we have our last parent from The Simpsons, Ned Flanders. The neighborino with the legendary lip caterpillar, Ned is the father of Rod and Todd, and you can tell he loves his boys. They have the same infectious joy for life itself that Ned has, showing that he's able to provide both a safe household and a happy one for his kids. If we were just talking about early seasons Ned, he'd be way higher, but the cracks in his parenting did show later on. In the episode Bart Has Two Mommies, it's revealed that Ned's overprotective parenting style has led to Rod being a total scaredy cat, so it's lucky Marge was around to make his son gay again.
Mrs. Simpson made me gay!
His worst parenting deed, however, was undoubtedly in the episode Todd, Why Hast Thou Forsaken Me, in which Ned makes Todd live with the Simpsons for several days, effectively kicking him out of the house for blaming God for his mother's death. I get that Christianity is important to you, Ned, but kicking your son out for having a hard time dealing with his grief? That's not a very Christian move, man. Right before our top 10, let's give a brief mention to Mr. Boss from Smiling Friends. Placing him so high might be controversial since we've only seen him parent for about 30 seconds, maybe? And all he does is breastfeed his baby and tell it not to bite him. But, well, it turns out this scene might have some more dark inspiration. Notice, if you will, the bruise on Mr. Boss's head and how similar it is to the baby who was punished in the other video. Mr. Boss literally broke a cycle of abuse for the sake of his baby. He may be an oogly goo, but he's an oogly good dad in our book. It looks like we're going to the dado realm, Jimbo. That's right, Hugh Neutron, Donut Boy himself, is next. This absolute legend of a man is Jimmy Neutron's father, and if he followed the usual cartoon formula, he'd probably be a total dunce who has no clue how to raise his kid. But while Hugh is, admittedly, kind of dumb, he's still a great dad on the whole. It can't be easy to raise a morally ambiguous genius like Jimmy, but Hugh manages it pretty well. He supports Jimbo with his inventions and is always there to offer some sage wisdom. The guy also loves pie and ducks, which, come on, how can you not love this guy? What's better than being a good dad to one kid? Being a good dad to 11! Enter Lynn Loud Sr., the father of Lincoln Loud, Lucy Loud, Lori Look, I'm not naming all of them. Just know that Lynn Sr. has a lot of kids, and while he's by no means perfect, he makes sure to give all of them the guidance and attention they need. There are occasions where some can slip through the cracks, but that's totally understandable given how many of them there are to take care of. The fact that he's not dead from stress, let alone an actually great father, is nothing short of a miracle of parenting. Now, I'll tell you what, if we didn't put Hank Hill at least this high up on our list, we just wouldn't be right. Now, Hank can be a real stick in the mud, and he's also a stickler for the rules. Furthermore, this extends to his treatment of Bobby. He has a hard time showing love to Bobby and can at times go overboard with his punishments. We can't ignore that time he forced him to smoke a whole carton of cigarettes, which would have to be the only time he did something we could also attribute to Peter Griffin. But with the bad out of the way, we come to the good aspects of Hank's character. He's a lot like propane in a way. Sure, he might burn pretty dang hot, but that burnin' is clean, I tell you what. Further still, it takes a slab of raw meat and cooks it into something worth throwing a barbecue for. That is to say, while Hank is tough on Bobby, it comes from a place of love. When he doesn't understand Bobby's hobbies and interests, he still does his best to, and even when Bobby disobeys him and gets into trouble, Hank will be the first one to rescue him. And heaven help you if you ever endanger his boy. And mind you, all of this is coming from a man who was constantly the target of verbal abuse and open hatred by his own father. Hank not only broke the cycle of psychological abuse, but he turned out to be a stellar father who raised a kid who's confident enough to be himself, yet modest enough to realize when he makes a mistake. One of the first iconic cartoon dads ever, Fred Flintstone, is next. The man who practically invented the cartoon sitcom. While Fred Flintstone isn't the greatest as a spouse, he makes up for it by being a purely loving father. Seriously, especially by 1960s standards and being a literal caveman, Fred is a shockingly caring father to his little girl Pebbles. The worst sin we could attribute to him as a parent is getting his kid hooked on Cocoa Pebbles cereal, but with how darn delicious and totally not sponsoring this video they are, we'd almost call that a good trait. At the tail end of the A tier, we're crowning the best father in adult animation, and it's none other than Bob Belcher of Bob's Burgers. One of the things that makes Bob's Burgers stand out in a good way is the fact that the family actually loves each other, which sadly is rare to be consistently shown in an adult cartoon. Bob can grow exasperated with his children. Heck, in the first episode he told his kids that he'd fire all of them as employees if he could.
And I feel like I should tell you, I'd fire all of you if I could.
Bob. But regardless, Bob is a protective and nurturing father who cares for each of his kids in the ways that they need. Whether it's Jean's love for music and weird sound effects, Louise's passion for pranks, or Tina's, just Tina really, Bob is a parent who can encourage all his kids to make sure they feel loved. On top of all of that, the guy cooks a mean burger. Bob is an absolute legend, and we wish we could put him even higher, but the fact remains that Bob is only human, so he is prone to some parenting mistakes. That might sound like a silly reason to not place him higher, but it's time to move on from all that flawed human beings stuff and talk about the most legendary dads cartoons have to offer. Legend dads, if you will. This is the S tier, reserved only for the most perfect paternal parents. At number 5, we have a certified Disney classic, Goofy. Frankly, Goofy's reputation as a dad is so legendary that we hardly feel the need to explain why he's this high. Being a single dad is already an impressive feat, and Goofy's always doing his best to bond with his son Max. Sure, he can embarrass him at times, but in his own words, all Goofy wants is to be part of his son's life.
I think I'm gonna be sick.
To the point where the mere thought of their relationship falling apart is enough for him to plan a spontaneous road trip with him. While he doesn't always understand what Max actually wants, Goofy is making genuine effort, and that's worth a lot, especially given how busy the guy is. He's not the only exceptional dog dad on our list either. Bandit Healer from Bluey is up next. Much like his wife Chili, Bandit is more or less written to be the embodiment of a near-perfect father. The amount of absolute chaos he puts up with just to keep his kids happy and entertained is insane. From pretending to be a robot to showing genuine sorrow for missing out on a dancing leaf just because Bingo wanted him to see it. Like any human being, he does get overwhelmed here and there, but it never leads to him mistreating his kids, and he pretty much always remains a gentle, caring father to his girls. The Bronze Medal of Fatherhood is the creator/dad of 3 superheroes, Professor Utonium from the Powerpuff Girls. Really, this top 3 is basically interchangeable. As for the Professor, this man is just, he's a national treasure. You'd think that a scientist capable of creating sentient supernatural life would have some edge to him, but Utonium is just, he's so nice. This man loves his daughters, always giving them advice and doing what he can to keep them safe while encouraging them to protect the city to whatever extent they can, though not without some of that fatherly overprotectiveness, of course. He's such a softie when it comes to them that he struggles to get the word grounded out of his mouth when he has to ground them for sneaking out to fight crime. We would place him lower for his hand in Mojo Jojo becoming a supervillain, since, as it turns out, Mojo Jojo was once the professor's lab assistant, and when the same chemical explosion that made the Powerpuff Girls affected his brain, he grew neglected despite all his hard work. But as is remembered by the professor later, Jojo was a reckless, terrible lab assistant who caused the chemical spill that created the Powerpuff Girls. So Utonium kicked him out for their own safety, which ironically ends up earning him more good dad points. Man, good for you, Professor! Our silver medalist of fatherhood goes to the third and final canine in the S tier, Spike from Tom and Jerry. The absolute worst you could attribute to Spike as a father is that he does tend to spoil his son Tyke. That being said, he's a dog, like an in-universe dog. I don't think social etiquette is really that important to them. All you need to know is that Tyke is everything to Spike, and really, what puppy isn't everything to its owner? From having father-son barbecues to making sure he's clean, safe, and healthy, to straight up threatening Tom with mutilation multiple times to either protect Tyke or simply encourage him. The bond between these two is the absolute cutest thing you'll ever see in a cartoon. Seriously, I dare you to watch one of those compilations without at least cracking a smile. Frankly, Spike and Tyke are the absolute sweetest father-son duo in cartoon history in our books, so why aren't they number 1? Well, okay, this is probably going to be at least a little divisive, but we have to give Uncle Iroh the gold medal of fatherhood. While every dad is a father, not every father is a dad, if that makes sense. A father is just someone who has a child, but a dad is someone who steps up, cares for their children, and guides them on the right path. Iroh had a son who tragically died in the line of battle, a son he pays tribute to regularly with a tearful song, but the void in his fatherly heart was filled by his relationship with Zuko. Iroh may be his uncle, but he's everything to Zuko that Ozai wasn't, and then some. He takes on a caring mentor role with Zuko, offering sage wisdom and advice about learning to be a good person instead of simply restoring his honor.
If you're lucky, you will never have to use this technique at all.
What places Iroh at the top, even above the Professor and Spike, is that their children were always good people. Spike's an adorable puppy, and the Powerpuff Girls are literally handmade superheroes. Zuko, on the other hand, was an exiled, disgraced prince who betrayed the only man who ever truly cared about him, but when he finally apologizes, Iroh was quick to hug him and offer forgiveness, revealing that he was never angry, just sad because he was afraid he'd lost his way.
I did lose my way.
But you found it again.
Man, really, even if literally everything else about Iroh didn't exist, this kind of fatherly forgiveness towards a guy who betrayed you and practically left you for dead is almost enough on its own to make you a surefire number 1. Iroh never gave up on Zuko, and that love and faith in his boy were enough to save Zuko from a life of darkness and despair. To everyone who's an Iroh to someone else's Zuko, we want to say, Happy Father's Day.